The next example is a little bit more comprehensive. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to use a lot of the functions that we talked about in this particular example. So this is where it starts becoming powerful, is when you start integrating formulas together. Now, we're going to go to the next section of the book, which is going to be your lookup functions. Now, lookup functions are very powerful and very useful. And a lot of people come to class specifically to learn how to do some lookup functions. So we're going to use what's called the VLOOKUP, and the VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup. So it's going to look up a vertical table or some sort of database. An HLOOKUP is a horizontal lookup, so it's going to look up horizontally. And so there's a couple of examples we run through here. Now in the student projects, I have step-by-step examples of what we're going to do right now. So we're going to open up this database, and we're going to go through and define all this stuff. We're going to create a VLOOKUP and pull information from a part list. And so then we went through and did a next step, did something else, did another step, and so I'm going to go through each step of the way. So that's what we're going to go through, is just kind of go through this example here in the book. If you want to follow that, you can. If not, you can just kind of follow along with me. So we're going to open up a file called VLOOKUP. So you go to File, Open, go to Browse, and choose the letter V for VLOOKUP, and choose Open. So we're going to incorporate concepts from the previous sections. The first concept we want to talk about is the range names. So this is a table here, and we have a range name defined. So I did this prior to the class in the exercise file. If you click on this drop-down arrow right here, we have two range names, one called prices and one called shipping. If you click on that prices drop-down, you can see it's going to highlight the prices table. If you choose the shipping range name, it's going to highlight the shipping table. The shipping table is an HLOOKUP because it's going to look up things horizontally. The VLOOKUP is going to look up things vertically. So it's going to look through these part numbers, it's going to find the part number, and it's going to put the answer right here. So we come up to this field here, we're going to put a VLOOKUP. I'll type in what the VLOOKUP looks like, just so you can see the format of it. It's VLOOKUP, and then we're going to have an input. The input is going to be the part number, and then we're going to have a range, and then we're going to have a column. And that's essentially all you need. The part number is going to be the input. The range is going to be prices, and the column is going to be the second column of the price table. And that's essentially how this works. So if I say equals VLOOKUP, the input to the VLOOKUP is going to be the part number. And then it says, what's the range name? Now, if you forget if it's price or prices, you can type PRI, and you can see there's a function called price, but the range name is called prices. So if you forget the exact spelling of it, you can make sure you can verify it as you start to type it in. So I'll double click on that. Then it says, okay, which column do you want to pull the answer from? The first or the second column of the prices table? In this case, we want to pull it from the second column of the prices table. And that's essentially what you do. And it's going to go basically look up that list and pull this down. So if I click here, pull it down, it's going to look up these part numbers. So WE5493 is right here, and that's going to be 44.99. And that put 44.99. If I type the WE44 to 44.95 instead of 99, then it updates my VLOOKUP and it pulls that exact value. So it's a direct lookup. That's what it's doing. But we have a few problems. Pretty easy to use from a straight off format. One problem I see is this part number, this 2473. It's actually different here, see it? So that should be 2. But it's weird that no matter what you put in here, if you put in 4, it gives me the same price. I don't really like that idea. Because why? Because I want it to be the exact part number. I don't want to be close like this. Let's figure out what went wrong. So we click on this Vlookup, 6399 on C5, pressure FX. And so we can look through the formula to see if there's anything that looks out of place. There's the lookup number. That's the input. There's the prices, which is the range. There's the column, which looks good. But there's actually a 4th parameter in here. This is actually dimmed out, means it's an optional parameter. This is a logical value to find the closest match in the first column, assorted in ascending order or true or omitted. So it's going to look for the closest match. That's what we're doing. It says to find an exact match, type in the word false. So if I type the word false right here, then that's what I need to put in there. That's the 4th parameter. So you can see it gives me an error now. And my 4th parameter is going to be the false statement, which says I want this to be an exact match. And as a result of this, it gives us an error message, which is a good thing. So if I change this number to 2, it gives us the price. But if I happen to type in the wrong part number, it gives me an error. So the people that are using this are phone operators. What is a phone operator going to do if in the middle of a sales call and they get an error message on the screen? They're going to hang up the phone and they're going to call you up and say, come fix it. The system broke. I lost the sale. So you come over and look at it and you take one look at it and you go, oh, you just typed in the wrong part number. Oh, and they say, oops, sorry. How can we get rid of that error message? Is there a way to do that? Didn't we talk about that a little while ago? Go over to the chat box and type in the function that you remember us talking about. How do we get rid of those error messages? Anybody remember? The if error. Somebody put it in the chat box. Why can't we use the if error here? We can say, as a matter of fact, we can say, if it's an error, then why don't we say something like, part not found? Would that be pretty clear? So the idea is we're going to go back to our VLOOKUP. In front of the V, we're going to type the word if error with an open parenthesis. Now that's your formula that we're going to put in. And on the back side of the form, we'll put a comma, and then we have to say, what do we want to appear there? In this case, I'm going to put a double quote and say part not found. Now, would that be pretty clear? Then you have to close it when you're done. So if they said part not found, they're not going to be calling me every 5 minutes. Because why? Because the system is kind of taking care of itself. Obviously, that's most likely what the problem is they put in the wrong part number. So we can use the if error to solve problems, to clarify things. I categorize it as an information function, but it's really not information. It's more of a logical function, but nonetheless, it's because it does provide information. There's our if error. I'm going to fill this down. I'm going to go back to this form. I put in a 2 in here, and it gives me the right part number. If I take this one to 7, it gives me an error. It says part not found. So I can come back and type in several places, and I can get the error message. The one problem it does create, though, is that it also puts in these little errors over here, too, and any other thing you're referencing. So you'd have to put an if error on these. If it's an error, then put a 0 there or something like that. So you might expand upon that a little bit more. Now, there's 2 things in this class that people have asked me about. I ask them at the end of the class, any questions? And the question always comes up is, what does the V stand for? And I said that earlier, it's called vertical, right? That's one question that comes. So I want to make sure I clarify that question, that the V stands for vertical. Let's look at it vertically. The other question comes up is this number 2. Some people don't quite grasp how we would use that value. And so what I want to do is I'm going to create another example. Down here, we're going to go to our price table. We're going to call this retail. And then we're going to create another price schedule called discount. Now, where do you know where you have a single price? There's always multiple prices. There's always a discount price, an employee price. There's different prices, correct? So we're going to create 2 columns and show how you can pull answers from multiple columns. So we're going to reduce these numbers. I'm just going to type in another number here. I'm going to take all these numbers and round them down to the nearest whole number. So I'm just going to type in $50 for that price, $100 for that one, $90, just round them down, 30, 60, 40, and this would put 6. This would be like maybe 150. And this one's going to be 60 here. And then down here, we're going to put 50. So just kind of round them down to a nearest whole number. So we have some discount prices. So I'll give you a minute to make sure you do that. Now we want to make sure it looks like it belongs. So the format is kind of funny. So we can click on this $54.99, and up in the menus here in the Home Ribbon tab, you've got the Format Painter. So click on $54.99, hit the Format Painter, and paint these items so that it looks like it belongs. So that you have a format that looks like this is all part of one thing. Now the problem here is that this range name does not include discounts. So to prove that, I can come up to my drop down here and choose the word prices, and sure enough, it doesn't include that. So this is where we start diving back into what we talked about previously about some of these things. So we need to fix this. We need to add this to the range name, the prices range. We need to expand this to the whole thing. Does anybody remember where we would go do that? Anybody remember at all? There is a function in here called, under the Formulas ribbon tab, there somewhere, everybody see it? Called the Name Manager. Remember, that's what we talked about, how to correct the area. So here's my prices. Now I can either change the letter to like a C if I wanted to, or I can just simply delete the whole thing and just reselect and redefine that area. And once I redefine it, I can close it and say, yes, I want to save it. Now click out of it somewhere and make sure it's going to work. So you want to click in your white area, click your drop down and choose prices, and it should cover both of these areas. If it doesn't right now, we need to fix that. Make sure you can get that to work, because if you, next step isn't going to work at all. You have problems with that. Okay, so hopefully you've got your range renamed. Now you come up to this $63.99, and we have a 2 in here. So if I want to pull the retail price off of this table, I would tell it I want to pull it from the 3rd column, not the 2nd column. And when you hit return on that, it's going to actually go through and do that. There it is. If I want to pull it from the 2nd column of the table, which is the retail price, I can put a 2 in here and pull out that way. See? Now I really don't know if I want a phone operator to be changing my formulas, because they don't really understand the significance of a comma. So I don't know if I really want them to do that. So let's go through and expand on this a little bit more And let's put up here into C1, I'm going to call this customer, CUST, type. This is my customer type. And on D1, I'm going to put a 2. So what I'm going to basically do is I'm going to reference D1, and then I'm going to pull that information into my formula. And so that means whenever I change this number to a 3, it's going to change all my formulas. And so we're talking about referencing. What we're trying to do now, which we're trying to integrate a lot of the things we talked about throughout the day. And this is the reality of Excel, is combining functionality together to come up with a single answer. So when you start combining these things together, that's when it becomes a little more complicated, but it's also very much more powerful. So hopefully you've got this customer type up here. For your formula, instead of putting a 2 in here, we're going to type D1. We're going to reference cell D1. And that means whenever I change D1, it's going to change the price because it's going to reference a different column. So everybody got that okay? So when I change this to 3, it changes my price. Change it to 2. Yeah, it's a little nicer. See it? So I have some other problems with this, but there are some other issues that come up. Okay, so there's that. Kind of working. A little bit more streamlined. I can give them whichever price discount they want. I can have 3 or 4 or 5 columns here if I wanted to. But now what I want to do is we're going to fill this down. So you go to your fill handle, fill it down. Oops. Now we got some problems, right? So what happened? So I'm going to click on this price, and that actually references D2, correct? Come to this one. That one's referencing D. That was D1. Now it's D2. D3. See, it's moving. See it? I don't want it to move. I want it to always look where? At D1. So this is when we start talking about absolute referencing. Now, if I don't show you these kind of problems, then you're going to leave the class a happy camper thinking, oh, this is going to be great, no problems, and nothing's going to work. Because you're bound to have problems like this. So you have to overcome these problems. We're going to this formula, and instead of putting the D1 in there, we're going to put a $D and then put a $1. Now, we could use the F4 key to put that in too. But we want to make sure that your formula shows the $D in there and the $1. And that way the D1 is going to be absolute. And so these are the kind of issues you're going to be faced with. And so we have to kind of try to cover those in this class so you can see where the problems or your typical problems would be. This is part of learning, which is seeing what the problems are. So hopefully everybody's got that all right. I can click on this, double click, and sure enough, it's always looking at D1. All right, so now if I change this number to 3, it changes everything to retail. See it? If I go to 2, it changes everything to that. So our formulas are now getting pretty big. And you can see that this is where we want to take you today, which is combining formulas together, and they sort of grow, and they continue to grow, continue to grow. You've all seen formulas like this, so hopefully we can kind of show you how these formulas get created and why they became so large. And this is sort of the, so while some of you are still working on that, go ahead and work on it if you have no problems with that. But I'm going to go throw some other scenarios out at you. So those that are still working on it, just focus on getting it working. I got it on my screen here. If you can't get to work, let me know. I can take a look at your screen and show you what you need to do. What if there was a price that was 0 in the database down here? What would a 0 price mean? What if it meant that a 0 price means the part's been discontinued? Or maybe it's out of service, or it's out of stock, I don't know what a zero price means. But you have to look at your data source and come up with a decision of saying, how do I overcome this little dilemma? So in this particular situation, we may or may not do that right now, but I'm just saying that we could put an if statement around this entire thing, right? I could say if what? If the Vlookup is equal to 0, then what? That's either true or false. If it is equal to 0, you can put a message there that says discontinued product. See? So you're going to have the database, it can give you the answers you need. So when the person puts the part number in, it says discontinued product, and they know that, oh, I'm sorry, that's a discontinued product. Give me another part number. And that's going to be very clear, and it's going to be very interactive for them. So you can go anywhere with this thing in terms of expanding this whole thing. So I was trying to do that just to give you a couple of minutes, those that maybe were still struggling with getting this formula to work. There are a lot of syntax issues in here and all that. So I'm assuming everybody's okay. Go into the chat box if you have a question or you haven't quite got it down. We can wait a few more minutes. But I have some other concerns. One of my concerns is this number 2. If I put a 3 in here and a 2, problem is that what if the salesperson or this phone operator forgets what a 1 and a 2 means? What if they say, well, they had the training, but they just forgot, and so they start giving everybody the discount price? So that's not clear that in this case what that is, so you'd have to know that. Well, you could do a couple things. One, you can put a little definition right here, and say, oh, 2 is equal to this and 3 is equal to that. You can do that, right? Or we can even make it more automatic than that. So come out to the right out here, and we're going to create what's called a drop-down. And come out to the right out here, somewhere out here somewhere, and we're going to type the word discount, and then we're going to type the word retail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a drop-down list. So they can click on the drop-down arrow. They can choose what type they want, and that's going to actually update it automatically. And they won't need to do anything other than make a choice. So go ahead and type in the word discount or retail out here. And we're going to come back to this point here. Maybe we'll do it on E. And we're going to have a little arrow that's going to drop down arrow in here. So this is making it much more powerful and much more seamless. Make sure you have your discount on retail. Click on E. Go to the Data tab. This is something we go into greater detail in the Level 3 class, but it's a very useful feature. We're going to go to this little drop-down where it says Data Validation. Data validation, there are many options in here, but the one I'm looking for is the option called List. I want to create a drop-down list. The source for that list is going to be this information. So the source is going to equal to this discount or retail names you typed in here. So it's going to pull that source into the drop-down list. So we're going to have a drop-down list at this point. So again, you want to choose the list function. And you also want to choose the source and choose that area. So to say OK to this, now you can see over here we have now a new little arrow. See it? Choose that arrow, and I can choose discount, or I can choose retail. So now all they need to do is make a choice of they want a discount price or a retail price. Now this is not quite working yet because this isn't changing, right? So this is where we need to kind of use some of these functions that we talked about to kind of look at this and say maybe we'll use an if statement here. We can say if what? If E1 is equal to discount, then we're going to give them, put a number 3 in there. If that's true, we're going to put a 3 in. If it's false, then we're going to put a 2 in. So we're going to put a logical statement here to say equals, if E1 is equal to discount, quote like this, comma. Now, if E1 is equal to discount, then I want to put a 3 in here. If it's not equal to discount, then I'll put a 2. So we're going to put an if statement in D1 that says that if E1 is equal to discount, if that's true, then we're going to stick a 3 in there. If it's not true, then we're going to put a 2 in there. So now all they need to know is they just choose the drop down and then leave them to know what a 1 and a 2 means. See if it's working. So I'll click on this drop down to retail and it changes to 2, and thus it changes all my prices. If I change it to discount, it changes all my prices. So that's how that works. So again, what we're doing is we're trying to expand and utilize all the formulas that we're using here. Now you might even use the text functions to manipulate the part number. So say for example you do a database dump and you extract your part numbers, and so for some reason every part number has a leading 3 zeros in front of it. So it converts to text string. So it's 0, 0, 0, and then the part number. And then every part number has a 1, 2, 3, 0, 0, 0. How can you get rid of that 0, 0, 0? You don't want to type in 0, 0, 0 in the part number. You want to type the part number. So we could use a write function to extract 7 characters. So that's kind of the idea of using these functions to solve additional problems. The if statement is always really useful because sometimes we have several answers we're looking for. And if this happens, we want this answer. And if this happens, we want that answer. And so the if statement is always useful to stick in there as a way to overcome some of those issues. Let's continue on with our worksheet and finish up. We're going to do our Hlookup now. And so what we'll want to do is we're going to look up this total cost. And we're going to come down to this table down here. And if that number falls within this range, then we're going to give them a $50 shipping charge. This 1,800 falls within this range, so that's going to give them $80 shipping. So it's looking for a close match between these ranges, and it's going to give them the answer that's in this little spot there. And it's pretty straightforward. It's just like the VLOOKUP, but you say equals Hlookup, and the input to the Hlookup is going to be the total cost. The range name is the shipping. If you didn't know that, if it was shipping, you can type SH, and you can see that it shows you the correct spelling of it. Click on that. And then we want to pull the answer from the second row of the shipping table. So you can say Hlookup, E5, shipping was the range name. We want to pull from the second row of the Hlookup. There's this. Double click on this. And now we need to come up with a sum total of all of our total cost. And then we'll look at some shipping dates. So hopefully you got the Hlookup in there. And come down to this total box here. Choose your auto sum, and it will actually sum up all the values. That's good for that one. Now for the shipping date, we're going to look at the shipping date and simply say, what is the shipping date? Well, the shipping date is going to maybe be like 20 days from today. So if I say equals today, this is some of our date formulas, and we're going to say plus 20 days. So you can actually add 20 days to the current date, and that would give you the date. Now this is kind of where it comes back with that question that we talked about earlier. Somebody asked earlier about, can I put this in as a static date? Because the minute I place this order and I open up the file again, the shipping date will change to a new date. And so that's where we would have to go through the date. There really isn't an Excel function to put a static date out there. But I can come over here and just say copy it, and then don't go anywhere, just say leave it there, and say paste. Now you can use this little icon here, which is called the Values button, or you can simply click Paste Special and choose Values, and that will make it a static date. To get rid of that marquee, you'd hit the Escape key, and now we have a static date in there, not a dynamic date. So you can write a macro to do that too. So that will encourage you to want to take the next class. So we can write a macro to go through and do that exact step that we did. And it could be a keyboard command, it could be a button. You click on the button, done. And you can do that automatically. So you can create new commands using macros, which is a Visual Basic program. Okay, so now we have our table. We have our parts list, got our total, got our date that's going to be shipped. Don't have to worry about the shipping date anymore, that's tax day, because that tax day has been moved out, I think. So we have to worry about that date. So the fact is that they're going to receive it on that date. What's the next question you ask? Can I have your credit card? That's the next question, right? We've got everything we need. We have the date it's going to be shipped. We have everything at our fingertips. And now all we have to do is ask that. Now, there are some problems with this that you can look at. In this date, if that date is Sunday, then that may be a problem because maybe it's not going to be shipped on Sunday, it'll be shipped Monday. Most people understand that. If you wanted to put like a weekday function in there, there's a function in the book that talks about weekdays. So I want to say just the number of days of the week. So 20 working days is what we're looking for. That would be further out, of course, but it's going to skip Saturdays and Sundays and holidays. So that would be another function you could use instead of just the today function. And there's other ways you can go about doing that too. So there's a lot of different variations of this, of course, but really what you're looking for is the key. So this is kind of the idea of Vlookups. Let's go to example 2. We'll do a couple more examples. We're going to test this out 2 different ways. I'm going to do the 8th graders. I'm going to find out what the score is, what their grade is, based on this table down below here. But I'm going to do this without a range name. And then I'm going to go through the 7th graders and do it again, but this time I'm going to use a range name, just to show you the difference of why you would want to use a range name and if it makes it easier or harder. So here we want to create a VLOOKUP. We want to look up that as the input. The range is going to be this range down here. One more, I think. Yeah, one more. And then we're going to pull from the second column. Equals VLOOKUP. Looks like it lost the B. So we have to type B6 if you can't click on it. Now there is no range name for this, right? So I'm just going to select this range down below here. And then I'm going to say comma, I'm going to pull it from the second column of the VLOOKUP. So you can actually put in the reference in there. And if you hit return on that, you can see that you can change that 54 to a different number and it will give you a different grade. So if I type this to 75, gives me a C. I'm going to change it to 85, gives me a B. Go to 95, gives me an A. So that's working. So we'll go to our fill handle and we'll fill it down. Nothing but errors. So let's see what happened. So these are the kind of issues you're going to be faced with. So you've got to be aware of them, of how to fix these things. If I click on this A, it's going to look at this table, correct? Hit the escape key. Go to the next one. You see what's happening to the table? It's moving. So as the table moves down, it's giving you wrong answers. So we need the table to be absolute. So the other way to handle this would be to select that, go into the formula, select the range of the table, and then press the F4 key on the keyboard, which will actually put dollar signs in there automatically. So you could type in the dollar signs in front of each letter and each number. But if you just press the F4 key, it's a little shortcut that puts them in there automatically. So now that we have that in there, if we hit return on that, you can see that I can fill it down and it's going to always look at the table. So those are some of the problems we run into. But now what we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same example, except we're going to use a range name to do this and show you that it makes things a little bit easier. And that's what I'm trying to help you see. Hopefully everybody's okay with that. We're going to highlight this area here, and we're going to call this grade table. But we can't put a space in it. Remember, no spaces allowed. So I'm going to select my grade table and type the word grade table. So a lot of times I use capital letters with no space if you've got like two words like this. Now you also have to hit the enter key to accept that. And then we're going to go back and click on the white area and make sure it got saved properly and that it's grabbing the right area. So you kind of click on a white area, choose your drop down, choose grade table. So now we're going to come over here and we're going to actually write the same thing, but we're going to use the grade table as our range, and the grade table is absolute. So equals Vlookup. The input's going to be, I lost F again, so I have to type F6, comma, what do we call it? GR, and it's in my list here, so I can double click on that. I'm going to pull it from the second column of the grade table. So you see how sometimes the range names makes things a little bit more easier to deal with. And it reduces or eliminates a few little problems that we're faced with too. And so this is another way to kind of go about this. If I double click on it now, you see that it actually, all the grades get added in there properly. So what I'm trying to get is to have you see and open your eyes to the reality that range names are very useful in some cases. Not all the time, but in some cases, especially something that's a very mature, that you're doing a lot of work with, that you're spending some time on, it might make things a little more easier, a little streamlined. So I don't have to really worry about the grade table anymore. Whenever I have to do a grade layup, I just type in the grade table and it knows the structure. If I change the grade table parameters, then it will change the numbers, of course. That's a little bit about VLOOKUPs. Now, let's talk about some of the deficiencies of VLOOKUPs real briefly here, just so that if you are using VLOOKUPs a lot and you to understand a little bit more about it, and this is just from a talk-through perspective, but one of the problems I run into is the exact match. We talked about that earlier. There's a parameter that you can put exact match or maybe have it a close match. So that always seems to come up. Another problem is that the input has to be in the first column. That's a limitation, meaning you can't use the second column and return the first column as the answer. So the first column has to be the lookup. We have to do the lookup in the first column. It always has to be here. But then the answer comes in either the second or the third or the fourth or whatever field we have up there. That's a problem. And I also noticed one more limitation, that this list has to be in sequential order. If I reverse this entire list, it wouldn't work. If I put in 100 90, 80 this way and put my A's, B's here, then it has to be in a numerical search order. So it has to be in this order. So those are a couple of limitations. There's a couple of ways you can overcome those limitations. One is there's other functions that are out there. Let's kind of walk through this a little bit so you can see what I'm referring to. Let's see if I can find them in here. There's my Countifs. Fine. I'll come down a little bit here. There's my lookup functions, Hlookup. So here's some examples that we went through. Some more examples. Now there's another function called the lookup function, which is similar, but it does something. There's another function called match index. So the match index, a lot of people like using. It's definitely very complicated to use, but you can walk through these examples if you're interested in that. Generally, we need to have the first column has to have your lookup value, otherwise you don't have a problem. But I've had people that said they have a database and they're pulling the input from a third column and they want the answer to come from the first column. Well, the match index could actually overcome that because the match index says, doesn't matter where it is, I can pull it from anywhere. So, but it's a little more, definitely more complicated. You can see the formula down here. You have to use the match and the index formula to kind of come up with this combined amount. So that was one other workaround. So if you're really interested in VLOOKUPs and looking at every possibility, then you can maybe take a look at these examples and see if that does anything for you. This is a new function that's out there. It's called the XLookup. This is brand new. And I've done some research on it, but I thought I'd at least throw some of the notes in here so I can come up to my FX. I'm not sure if it's working yet. I haven't checked lately. But if I just come up to my FX, type XLookup, it's in there. Good. So there's an XLookup, and it has some other related parameters in here. So I haven't used it that much, but there's another new function out there called XLookup. That's why it's included in the book, just for fun. And you can read what it does, but it kind of overcomes a few of these limitations, but then it has its other limitations that I've discovered as I was kind of reading through some stuff on that. So there is some interesting information. So that's all your lookups. There's also an offset. We'll look at databases too at some point. Maybe we can come back and look at that. So this is an example 6. You're going to click on the team name here. And we're going to do our VLOOKUP. So equals VLOOKUP. You can see the input to VLOOKUP is going to be the player name. The second parameter is going to be the range. So the range is going to include probably just the data, not the labels, just the players. Select all these. And the third parameter, in this particular case, is going to be number 2. The row column number 2. Now remember, I did this once before and received an error. Let me find out why. I did get an error. I think we need to put that false value in there. That is the exact match. So you can type in false like this. I think you can also type 0 and 1. So 0 ends up being false and 1 equals true. There's a couple of things you can type in. So it actually worked that time. So that tells you the team. Now, in terms of filling this way, we really can't do that because it will move the entire table. So we have to go into this item here and make this absolute. So I'll do a Shift F4, put my dollar signs on that range, and then I can simply roll it this way. But then as you can see, you've got to change the numbers around. Oops, looks like we need the C4 to also be absolute. So we need this one to be absolute also. So we can roll it this way. And then we still need to go in and change the number. So we put in the first input is absolute, and then the range is absolute. We're going to pull that from the second column, and then it's going to be false. For this one here, the HR is going to be column number 11. So we can put 11 on that one. And this one here is going to be RBI. RBI is on 12. So you can simply specify whatever parameter you want to look up. Now, when you change these player names out, PHY, Murphy, it pulls those statistics up. So when I put in a different name, Leonard, and it pulls up that information. And you can also create a lookup like we did earlier. You can do it that way too. Again, you can use the VLOOKUPs to look up lots of information. If I was an announcer or something like this, then I would want to maybe put a lookup here so I can look up these player names. And that way I act like I know everything about these players because I have all their statistics associated with this. I type in their name or do the drop down, and then we can get the statistics out of that. So that's kind of the idea of the VLOOKUP. You can use it for lots of different things, you know, looking up all sorts of stuff. Now, essentially what this basically is a if statement. It's a sophisticated if statement, a nested if statement that simply goes out and says if this, if it's 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 this. So instead of doing that, or 64 times maximum, then we can use a VLOOKUP to look at it this way. It makes the logic a little bit easier. So that's what VLOOKUP is all about. So that's kind of the idea. So that is just another quick example of just using the VLOOKUP. Now let's take a quick look at our database functions. Just a real brief look at it. I mean, these are just functions that are available that you might want to use. We'll look at maybe just a few functions, like maybe the count function and the sum function or something like that. There's quite a few different D functions. The D functions are called database functions. And so again, using a large database, these are ways to look up. Now, these are very similar to the SumIF and the Countif. So these are very similar to that, but there's quite a few other functions in here. But so you'll see the difference in that. And to do this, we're going to open up a file called database. Go to file open. And we'll open up browse, choose the file called database. And we can zoom in here a little bit. Let me just move this up, this screen. So here's our database functions, and here is the condition that we're going to be using. The database functions is, if you want to figure out how they work or what parameters you use, you can simply start here and say equals dcount. We do parentheses. Now you're going to get a little screen tip that pops up that shows you the order that things need to be put in place. So this says the database is the first parameter. The field that I want to count is the second parameter, and I will click the label on top. The third parameter is the criteria, and this is the criteria right over here. So the first parameter is going to be the database. Now the database includes the labels. You want to select the entire database, including the label. The second parameter, put a comma on that. The second parameter is going to be the field. So we have to figure out what we want to count. So if you click on purchaser or sales or something like this, that's the field we're going to count. I usually just pick a field that's on the far right side, because it doesn't really matter for a count. It's just whatever record is in there. Then the third parameter says, where's the criteria? Well, the criteria includes both of these fields And that's simply what you do. If I hit the enter key, it will actually go out and do the same thing that the Countif did, or just the count function in general, in that sense, or it's going to do based on this criteria over here. So if I come over to this criteria and I change this one, it goes to 3825. Let's check that out. Here's 3825. There's 1. Now that one's spelled differently, so it's not going to consider that one. There's 2. There's 3. There's 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. Depending on 8 of them. If I change this to 3845, 45, then it simply gives me the new answer. So you can actually just type in your criteria in that way. And so this is just another function that looks more of the database perspective rather than a slice of data. So it's looking at everything right now. And I can change this around. I can put in here different fields. I could put in the word purchaser, and I can put in sprint, and it tells me that value. So I can put in whatever criteria I want to put in here, and it will look at the entire database and find that field and return the answer. It's really a more dynamic program. The other one is more, looks at a specific slice of information. This one's constantly looking at the entire database. So down here, we can actually do the same thing with the sales amount. So if I choose the average, I'll just do this, the count and the sum. So if I say equals dcount, the input's going to be the database. So I'll select the entire database, comma, the second parameter is going to be what field I want to count. So I can choose this one would be fine. And then the third parameter is what is the criteria. It's going to be these two fields there. And that's going to go out and look for every record that is greater than 10,000, and it will return the number. So it's a logical criteria. If I change this to 18,000, then it's going to give me just 2. So you can change these numbers around and make changes that way. Sum is the same way. If I say equals the sum, and I choose the entire database, I choose a field I want to sum up. So this is where I do need to click on the sales field, because this is the one I want to sum up. And then this is the criteria, and it actually puts that number in there. So that's how it works. It's very similar to the dsum and the daverage and all that. So if you need to see your criteria visible like this might be the better approach. If you're always changing out and searching different parts of the field, then that may be the way to go. Otherwise, the dcount and the dsum would work. Well, not the dsum, but the countif and the count sum would work just as well. So just another set of functions that are kind of interesting, especially for database perspective. We are using a lot more databases these days, and so it's one way to go about it.